Welcome, Irish fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown YouTube channel. We want to talk to you about a topic that has come up recently due to all this COVID and everything. We all are aware that this year doesn't count as far as eligibility is concerned, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. It doesn't count. So, Ian Book is a fifth-year senior, and he's had two of the better games of his career the last couple of weeks. Obviously beat the number one team in the country against Clemson, and then had one heck of a game against Boston College, probably the best game of his career, especially against a Power 5 team.
When you consider the quality of the competition, absolutely,
Correct.
I think that was his best game.
Yes, I agree. And so I guess that begs the question, should he – well, there's two parts to this, right? Should he come back for a sixth year? And will he come back for a sixth year if you're hearing any kind of rumblings about that? So let's start there. Do you think he'll come back for a sixth year?
Well, based on what I've been told up to this point in time, no, I don't think he's going to come back for a sixth year. And I think that decision is based off of really just kind of what the expectation was going into the season, which was honestly when the season started. I mean, it wasn't until I'm trying to remember the timing of when this decision was made, but we didn't really start hearing rumblings about the extra year being given until I think camp had kind of already started, or at least early into the season. So I think a lot of these kids kind of went into this season thinking, well, this is it for me. So when you kind of go into the season with that mindset, you're not going to change your mind midstream, especially when you're in a situation where you got games to prepare for. You've got to go out and beat Duke in the opener, and you got to beat Florida State and Louisville and Pitt and Clemson and those teams. So I don't think Ian Book and a lot of these players are really thinking about it other than the obvious ones, like a Jonathan Dorr, who's already said he plans on coming back. Well, that's a no-brainer because kickers don't get drafted really high anyway. So it's just kind of like
drafted at all, frankly.
Right. And so, so obviously it would make sense for him to come back. And of course, he would be a fifth-year senior, so he would then get to do some work on his master's degree. So, I think a lot of the decisions are going to be made more for like younger guys, like, Bo Bauer got a year back, so him and Shane Simon both spent their freshman years playing special teams. Well, now they can technically get a year back, but that won't be for a couple more years that they have to make that decision. Really, 2022 is when they would have to make that decision. So
that's true.
So I think Ian Book kind of went into the season thinking this is it for me. So I think right now there hasn't really been that time to think about, okay, well, what am I going to do next? Because I think he's worried about the next thing. The only thing that I think Ian Book and a lot of the veterans are worried about is what's the next team we play, not what my next steps are. Right. Sure. Now, could that change after the season? Yeah. And I think that would depend on if the NFL comes back, and this will somewhat segue, but I'll let you segue it with your question. I think this would somewhat be determined by what does he do the rest of the year. I think right now, I would imagine Ian Book's draft stock is not super high. He's not a big quarterback. He hasn't been overly impressive in games like this. Notre Dame fans like to obsess about his raw numbers and where he ranks, but NFL teams are going to look and see who those numbers were piled up against.
Of course.
And for much of his career, it's going to be like, okay, you had 5 touchdowns against New Mexico, 5 touchdowns against Bowling Green, 4 touchdowns against a really bad Duke team, 5 touchdowns against Navy. There's not one guy on Navy's defense that we would consider drafting, and they're going to look at that. Well, then that's the story, I think, for much of Ian Book's career. Now, the question is over the next 3 regular season games and then the ACC championship game and then hopefully, postseason game or 2, what does he do then? If you can repeat this performance against North Carolina and then against Clemson again and then either an Orange Bowl game or a college football playoff game, well, now maybe his draft stock changes a little bit, and that might solidify his decision to leave. Or it doesn't change, and the NFL's telling him, you're probably late round undrafted guy, and then that could factor in too. But right now, I don't see him – I don't think he plans on coming back. I think that the decision will get revisited in the offseason when you have time to sit down and process it all, and then maybe the answer would change.
So let me ask you this. So this is another part of the question. It's a different question. If you were advising Ian Book, or if you were part of the coaching staff, again, that's probably 2 different ways to go about it too. If you're part of the coaching staff, do you want Ian Book back? Are you inviting him back? Because you have to, at Notre Dame, you got to be invited back. You know how that goes, right? So that's number 1. And then number 2, if you're advising Ian Book, if you're in his, circle of trust, right? Do you advise him to go back to Notre Dame, or do you advise him to take his shot in the NFL?
I think when you look at it from a coaching staff standpoint, this is a no-brainer. I mean, the Notre Dame coaching staff is going to ask Ian Book back. I'll be shocked if they don't. As much as Brian Kelly likes playing veteran quarterbacks, he'll ask Ian Book back for 9-10 years if the NCAA would
if
let
he's
him,
allowed to do it, sure.
So yeah, I think he'll ask him back, and I think that because Tyler Buckner did not play his senior season, he will be a true freshman. I think those things factor into it too. There is no Phil Dracovic, type of player behind Ian Book. They haven't really seemed like they're in any kind of rush to groom Brendan Clark or Drew Pine. I mean, they've played in 2 games, despite the fact 6 of Notre Dame's opponents have a 500 record or worse. 4 of Notre Dame's 8 opponents have a losing record. They still didn't find a way to get, the young quarterbacks into games. So, I don't think Notre Dame's in any hurry to develop those guys. They're, Brian Kelly's so focused on the 1 year that I think that's an issue that they have, but that's a different conversation. So,
right.
And coaching wise, it's a no brainer. Of course, you're going to ask Ian Book back.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not I would ask it, I would want to come back if I was Ian Book or was advising Ian Book. Again, it depends on, and I think you and I might have a, just slight conversation we had before we started the show, have a little difference of opinion on this. To me, if Ian Book is going to be drafted in the first 3 or 4 rounds, if that's what he's hearing, hey, you're a 2nd, 3rd, 4th round draft pick, then you go. Because you're not going to, I don't see a scenario in which Ian Book as a 6-year senior all of a sudden becomes Baker Mayfield from a draft stock status. I don't see that. Who knows, but I don't see that. So I don't know if you're getting 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, if there's a higher ceiling for you than that. So then you go. But if they're telling you late rounds undrafted, then come back, because here's the reality of it. You say, well, go start your NFL career. Well, number one, if you're going to get drafted that low, you're not going to be making a lot of money anyway. It's not guaranteed that you're going to make a roster.
It's not life-changing money.
Right. And especially if you have what Ian Book would have as a 6th-year senior next year, a Notre Dame degree and a master's degree. I mean, let's be honest. You're the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. You're going to have multiple degrees from Notre Dame, 7th-round money, and a whole lot different than whatever job offers Ian Book's going to be getting coming out of college. So
outside of football. Yeah. Right.
And so, but what you can guarantee if you come back for a 6th year is another year to play college football. Now that's part of it. The other part of it is this: who else does Notre Dame lose? I think that has to be considered too. Do they lose
3/5 of their
2 offensive linemen? Do they lose 3? Do they lose 4? Does Javon McKinley come back? Does Ben Skoranek come back? For 6 years? I would hope not. Does Tommy Trumbull go pro early? I don't think so, but you never know. There's just so many things that factor into this as to what would go into his decision. It's kind of like what made Darius Walker decide to leave early. I think it was the wrong decision, but it was I'm not going to play behind that terrible offensive line, and so it was it was a wrong decision because, he would have got his brains beat in, but it was also like, well, you were an undrafted free agent or 7th-round pick anyway. So I don't know what you had to lose, but I kind of look at it like that. It just depends for me on what your draft status is, because
that's fair.
By coming back, if you're a late round undrafted pick, you say, well, you're not going to improve your draft stock. Okay, fine, but you're going to get a chance to play football. Because if you're a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick, what are the odds that you're going to ever really play much in the NFL? I mean, look, let's be honest, Tom Brady's the anomaly. Okay.
No doubt.
It's like,
right.
It just doesn't happen often, so you get one more chance to play Notre Dame. And then, look, there's a better chance of him going out as a 6-year senior and having another big year if he builds on this year and then being drafted higher than, for all of a sudden the offseason workouts are going to be limited because of COVID. He's not going to be able to throw for as many teams. He's not going to probably be able to meet with as many teams. Like, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to limit him and prevent him from using this draft time to build his stock up the way that he could if he was to, in a normal year. So come back for another year, play for another year, build your draft stock up, and then go out next year. Because then again, if you're an undrafted free agent or a low round pick, you've got 2 degrees from Notre Dame, and you get a whole nother year of playing that you'll never get to lose, because from an experience standpoint, not experience for the NFL, but just life experience.
Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah. I see where you're coming from. I have a heart, even though he has played great football the last couple of weeks, and his stock is rising from a quarterback at Notre Dame standpoint. And look, I am not an NFL draft guru or any of that, but I don't know that his stock is going to go a whole lot higher from the NFL standpoint, after this year. Now, I think I do think that he's going to continue to do better, and I think that he can take Notre Dame to wherever they're going to end up.
Right.
I think he's going to be a big part of that, either negatively or positively. And if it is a positive, and let's say they win the national championship, I don't think his stock will ever be higher.
Right.
Because the issue that Ian Book is going to face, which is never going to change, is, his measurables. That's never going to change. We know that he can make the throws, but he's not making the Trevor Lawrence throws, right?
Yeah, he doesn't have the arm strength that Baker Mayfield or especially like a Kyler Murray has to overcome that lack of
height
size
issue, right? I mean, and look, he's mobile. I think that means less in the NFL than it does in the college game, right? I mean, I think we can both agree on that. So I don't know that his stock is going to get any higher.
Right.
Now, I will say that I agree with you in that, look, you're never going to get a chance to be the quarterback at Notre Dame ever again.
Right.
And you and me sitting here with the ages that we are, I think we might look at that a little bit differently than somebody that's in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, I mean, because it completely makes sense. It's kind of like, well, hey, look, let me get to the NFL and let me take my chance now. But, I think for me, it's like, well, look, you don't get another chance to be the quarterback at Notre Dame. And look, the San Francisco 49ers aren't exactly beating down the door for you to come, quarterback their franchise either.
Sure.
So what's going to give you a chance to play football? And I think that at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to is I want to play football, and it's a different decision for a guy like a Robert Hainsey, Liam Eichenberg, especially Liam Eichenberg, who's, what do you want to come back for a 6 year and maybe go from a late first to the top 10? I mean, that's a whole different conversation than you're going to be an undrafted free agent or a 6th round pick, so. Sure. That's the way I look at it is I feel like the fact that his draft status isn't going to change is just a reason to come back. Like if you don't view me as anything but a backup and 6th, 7th round pick sometimes means 3rd string quarterback.
Sure. No,
then, that's a completely different animal. So I look at it and say, well, then, yeah, come back and play one more year. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that that's what I want to happen. I'm just saying that's what I, think are the best options. And so now you brought up a point that I think is sort of the game changer. If he leads Notre Dame to a national championship, then I think it's almost kind of like leave.
What's the point?
All you can do now is ruin your legacy.
Absolutely.
Come back next year with a lot of, go 9-3 and that's like, oh, you lost your last game or whatever. Like you go out, could John Elway maybe have led the Broncos to a 3rd Super Bowl? Maybe. But why take that chance? You just won
right off into
back,
the sunset, baby.
Right, and I think that I think that would be something that would be a bit of a game changer. Like, hey, man, you won him a championship.
Sure.
You got you got your coach who you supposedly love and respect and everything. You got him that championship. Man, go start your NFL career. You're a 5th year senior. You might have one master's, or at least close to it. Whatever. Maybe you're not a high pick, but I mean. Here's the thing too: is to lead Notre Dame to a national championship, he's going to have to play phenomenal football.
He is,
and if you're
his stock will never be higher,
right? So now you've kind of reached that pinnacle where next year, 6 year senior, maybe the schedule's such that we could compete for a championship next year. And that's the thing you have to think about it. But if you win the championship, it's kind of like
it's no brainer.
Love you guys. I'm gonna I'm gonna have I'm gonna ride off into the sunset with my big old national championship ring and. Yeah. If I don't get drafted or they don't want me, then I've got a degree from Notre Dame and I'm going to go make a lot of money. But but my legacy is going to be
sure.
I mean, as much as Notre Dame fans love Ian Book now, and it's some strangest thing, like just it doesn't matter what he does. It's just some fans just
love him.
Could you imagine if he led him to a national championship?
Oh my goodness gracious!
Like
he would have the statue next to Brian Kelly.
Yes, they may build a statue for him instead of Brian Kelly. Yeah, I mean, that's just a way that he's perceived.
Yeah, you're right.
Right or wrong. And so, I mean, if you win the national championship, that's a game changer. That's a completely different situation for me. Now, I'm also a believer that part of this decision from a Brian Kelly standpoint, I think part of it depends on who do you view as the future of your football team. If you genuinely think that Brendan Clark is the next guy, then it may alter your decision for Ian Book a little bit. But if you view Tyler or Drew Pine, but if you view Tyler Buckner as the that's who we want to bridge Ian Book to, then you're going to want Ian Book. You're going to put all your efforts into getting Ian Book back, barring a national championship. Because I could see if they win a national championship, Brian Kelly could also leave. That's a whole different show.
No, that's a whole other conversation. Yeah.
But if it's Tyler Buckner, then that's even more incentive for you to bring Ian Book back because you want that year of Tyler Buckner learning under Ian Book, how to go about his business. I mean, you're going to learn a lot from a 6th year senior who's now going to be going on his 4th year as a starter. So I think that would add even further incentive for Brian Kelly to bring it back. And then you work somehow with Ian, like, hey, look, any game we're even remotely up, we're going to put Tyler in the game.
Right. Sure.
Kind of like you have the conversation with Ian that you had with Trevor Lawrence. Hey, Trevor, we're going to put DJ Ongelele in the game at times just for a series here and there because if something happens to you, we need to make sure he's ready. And I think Ian Book would handle that well, as long as it's, again, you pick and choose. Notre Dame or Clemson did that against like the Citadel and Wake Forest. They wouldn't have done that if they were playing Notre Dame in week 2, right? So there's being smart about it. So I could see a scenario like that, but I would imagine that Brian Kelly would want him back. I would imagine that Ian Book wants to leave right now, but I would imagine that depending on how the season goes and depending on what the NFL says, that's a decision that could be changed at some point down the road. But again, I think his NFL's draft stock is still unknown, and that's what we have to see is what does he do from here on out? Does he build, like you said, Ben, does he build on what he's done the last 2 games? If he does that, to your point, even if they don't win a title, his stock may not be higher, and he may want to take that chance because he is a competitive kid. But if they're still telling him undrafted free agent, it's like with what's going to be a limited draft cycle from a workout standpoint, I think that has to be factored in too, is we're probably going to have a lot of COVID restrictions again. I think that has to be determined as well. Like, do I really want to deal with that in what's supposed to be a deep quarterback year? I'll come back next year and, go through it there. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
No, I agree. And it's a fun topic to kick around and look, to have options like that for Ian Book, good for him. I mean, that's great. And if you don't like Ian Book, there's a good chance he's going to lead you to some good things this year. So you might as well get on board. Now's the time. So,
well, I mean, I think that my thing would say, yes, it's been a great 2 games, but there's still a lot of football
let's see.
left.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be fun to watch.
Right. I mean, Eric Dungy has a win over Clemson too. You know what I mean? Like let's what's the kid, that Nathan Peterman, right? At Pitt. He has a win over Deshaun Watson and Clemson too.
That's fair.
Right. Let's see him build on this. I think
I get it.
That before
for sure.
We jump on board, because what I don't want to get into a situation is let's say Ian Book goes out and plays poorly against North Carolina. And then the people that have been silent the last 2 weeks that have been critical of him in the past, and again, I've been critical of him in the past too, but for different reasons, because I'm trying to be objective analysis. Then they're going to jump in and be like, well, he got lucky or whatever, and then they'll jump in to criticize him. And that's what I get tired of. It's like the fans that love Ian Book, they don't have a word to say after the Louisville game, but then they want to run their mouths after BC game. And they're going to be silent if he throws 3 picks against North Carolina, and the people that don't like Ian are going to jump in. And that's one of the things I hate about social media. It's like you just constantly have that instead of just saying,
Warriors, baby.
He had a bad game, right?
Yeah, right. And it's allowed. You're allowed to have a bad game, by the way.
Right. And playing a bad game doesn't negate what he did against Clemson and BC, just like playing against Clemson and BC doesn't mean he didn't play the way that he did in past games. It's all part of the bigger picture. So that's my whole point is, how about we let the story get written and completed first?
Yep.
Then we can look back and have the conversations. We saw with Tony Rice. I mean, you talk to Lou Emoji at BGI, he'll tell you about it. Even during the 88 season, there was still a lot of negativity towards Tony Rice. Well, fast forward, 30 years now, and it's like, well, everybody loved Tony Rice. You know what I mean? Because he's got that exactly. It's like Tony Rice, But during his tenure, it wasn't that way, And so, the story of Ian Book's career at Notre Dame is yet to be completed. And how the final chapter is written is going to determine, number one, what he does next for his career. Number two, how he's remembered.
Sure.
Because there's still that one category that neither he nor Brian Kelly has at the end of the day is what you're determined by.
Yep.
And, and we need to see if they're capable of going out and getting it.
No, like I said, it's going to be a fun story to watch play out, and we'll be right here in the driver's seat for you, bringing you all the information. So make sure you stay tuned to Irish Breakdown, our YouTube channel, the irishbreakdown.com, on all of our podcasts. And we're going to bring you more conversations like this, some more back and forth, and just some, let's be honest, it's the ideas that float around in our heads, which is a scary place to be. But every once in a while, we'll let you guys in on it, and we appreciate you tuning in. So until next time, we'll talk to you later.